Hello and a very warm welcome to the programme. It is called Gentrification, a neighbourhood changing from poorer to wealthier, often pricing out residents and transforming its social fabric. It's happening in cities across the world and it is often criticised. But can it be a force for social good? You're watching Roundtable. Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. It may well be a familiar pattern in a city, a town near you, a less well-off neighbourhood where wealthier workers move in. Shops change, property prices go up, and the poorer people who live around there are forced out. Some people can profit from it, and not everybody dislikes it. But is there a way to make sure that the more vulnerable don't lose out?
First come the artists, then urban regeneration. House rents rise and pre-existing communities are forced out. This is gentrification, coined by sociologist Ruth Glass in 1964 to describe the process of wealthier, often white communities moving into traditionally working-class urban areas. It's happening in cities from New York to London, Berlin to Johannesburg. Protests against gentrification are becoming more frequent. In April, thousands of people in Berlin marched against rental insanity, or Mietwahnsinn. Since 2008, campaign group Save the Latin Village has been in a legal battle to stop the demolition of an indoor market, home to about 120 Latin and ethnic minority shop owners. The UN says this would seriously affect the economic situation of the people working there and would mean their cultural life simply disappears. Those in favour of gentrification often argue it's a positive sign of economic growth, as money flows into neighbourhoods and buildings and roads and parks are renovated. But do the less wealthy always have to lose out? Can gentrification be a force for social good?
Well, we're going to kick those ideas around now with, first of all, from Atlanta, Georgia, USA, King Williams, filmmaker of Atlanta Way, which looks at gentrification in his state, that is Georgia. With me in the studio, we have Rob Pearson. Executive Director for Nexus Planning, Javie Huxley is here, campaigner for Save the Latin Village, that is in Tottenham in North London. Elena Besussi here, also from the Bartlett School of Planning at University College London. We have a lot to talk about. King, let me come to you first of all. And I was in Atlanta, 1987, making a film about gentrification. So we have to say, first of all, this is not something new that is contentious. But I went to a part of the city where the old Coca-Cola building was, and the projects, if you like, the rough apartments that were there were no place that I would want to live or would want anybody else to live. They've gone now. What has been put in their place?
What's been put in their place has been mixed income housing, which has been this idea of people who are poor, richer, and people in the middle all living together. And it's semi-worked out if you don't look into the details.
Okay, well, you're going to tell me what those details are, but semi-worked out implies, because I saw what these places were like, that it's a great deal better than it was before.
It is much better than it was before. And the reason being is because of all the development that's happened around the projects as well. Before that, there was literally nothing there, no gas stations, no grocery stores, no anything. So you just had a lot of poor people concentrated with nothing to go to.
So what's the problem?
So the problem has been that not just that particular case, but a few around the city of Atlanta, which is they've been cherry-picked the best of the best residents who are poor. So the best residents who are poor, who show the most aptitude with their children, or the most likely to grow in a skill or a trade, and it hasn't been given to everyone, those opportunities.
Okay, but better than it was before, Elena, and everybody else here at the table. It does give people a chance, and it's a better life than they maybe have had.
It does, but the question to ask is why was the chance taken away in the first place? Gentrification has to be looked at as a process where disinvestment is made in certain areas, and those areas then become available for these new projects where money
But you cannot help what was there before if you're arriving at trying to find a solution for it now.
I'm not talking necessarily about what the solution if you find an area that has been blighted or decaying, but we need to question why those areas have become available, why those areas have become available for investment, and therefore for triggering a process that is partially good, often not good at all, And it's a question that we need to ask, and the solution comes from sometimes having a much more piecemeal approach to regenerating areas, looking at what the opportunities are for a much more acupuncturist, if you want, type of approach, rather than just throwing everything out and rebuilding.
Why has gentrification, if you like, we'll come to you about this, why do you think it's become a dirty word? Because you talked about regeneration, I've talked about improvement, and yet it is always associated with something that is wrong.
I think gentrification has become a dirty word because it's associated with its most negative aspect, which is displacement. Be that cultural displacement, be that economic displacement in terms of class. That's why it's become the dirty word it has become.
And is it inevitable that happens?
It's not inevitable. I think we are beginning to learn from mistakes of the past, and I know King will talk about that some more, but I think it's not inevitable if we get the politics and the economics right and the governance. Governance is key, and it's something here in London that we're trying to work out readily.
Javie, you want to tell us your story? Because you're of Chilean descent. There's a place called the Latin Village in Tottenham, most famous for its football team, Tottenham Hotspur, but in North London, that you want to save because you fear that it is being swept away by gentrification.
Well, for me, I feel like gentrification and regenerations have become very popular buzzwords in this country. But in the case of the Latin Village in particular, it's social cleansing, because 196 unaffordable homes that Grainger want to replace it with and a shopping centre, this is only going to kind of be helpful for an affluent middle-class community that will be pushing out working
None of it is
class people of
affordable
colour.
housing?
No, none of it's affordable
And
housing.
is affordable housing being provided elsewhere?
No, so this gentrification is social cleansing because the migrant, 100% migrant and working class community that are residing within the Latin Village in Tottenham will be pushed out as a result of it.
What have they been told will happen to them? What do you understand?
So what's going to happen, what the Grainger have
Grainger being
promised,
what? A development
developers,
company?
the UK's biggest buy-to-let developer. And they've promised to relocate the traders on a site across the road and then put them back, but there's no guarantee that they won't be priced out. And if we look towards Elephant and Castle, who've had a similar situation where they're actually fighting a similar appeal and they've got a date put forward for the demolition, around 40 of the traders that were promised to be relocated weren't.
Are we simply talking about traders with their market stalls, or are you talking about traders with their homes?
So it's a mixture of things, but there are about 60 units within the Latin Village of traders, and it's a thriving community. Every single unit is full within the Latin Village. If you look at so many high streets where you have chain stores, they're empty.
I've got to push you on this one. Is this where they live or just where they work?
So it's where they work, but with the demolition, it will also be the surrounding areas.
So they still have their homes, the places where they live. They're just having to sort of move their business a bit.
But it's not as simple as that, because it's a working class community that rely on their livelihoods, their cultural well-being. This is the place that we get this from.
I mean, this is just improvement, is it not? They're not getting kicked out of their houses. They're just being given a better office, if you like.
Well, it is not improvement because it's unlikely that they will be able to carry on with their businesses in an area where rents have gone up for their business and business rates might go up. It's impossible to retain your own livelihood. You might still have a home, but you don't have a job. Gentrification is about displacement of a variety of things, of culture, of the kind of economy that that provides for working class groups, for the kind of livelihood. I mean, gentrification is a process of removing or kind of altering the social makeup of an area under the assumption that every time we pour more money in, this is good. But these businesses and these communities are alive, thriving, providing for each other, providing for the rest of London. Why should they be moved?
Some are, and I don't doubt that yours is. But let's go back to King, because there was another place I went to in Atlanta back in 1987, and it's a city I love. I've been back many times, and that was called downtown Atlanta, underground Atlanta, a place that was filled with drunks, drug addicts, people pushing narcotics. It was a place you did not want to go, and they redeveloped this. It was underneath the city. It was where the old terminus was, a very famous one from the Civil War. Now, that was an improvement that was needed, even if underground Atlanta hasn't worked financially. It has to be done in some places, doesn't it?
It does have to be done in some places. And in the case of Underground, they've had several iterations of it improving. The main problem now with Underground is that it's surrounded by a new demographic of people, which is college students. And so they're trying to figure out how to either cater to the college students altogether or to try to cater to a new crowd of people who are moving into Atlanta.
Okay. Rob, how do you spot the difference? This is what I'm trying to get at. Some areas are in dire need of improvement, and some areas, as Javie is saying, are best left alone. How do you work that out when the modus operandi, the reason for being with planners and developers is surely profit?
Yes, I mean, that's at the heart of everything. You know, these are not altruistic bodies unless it's coming through a local authority. And that's a separate conversation. But certainly when it comes to the private sector, yes, at the heart of it, it's got to stack up. But that said, you know, a lot of work is done at grassroots level, or should be done at grassroots level. That's when regeneration, as I would call it, as gentrification is an offshoot of regeneration, really. It works best when communities are consulted at the outset. That's a fundamental pillar to good regeneration.
Is it done at the outset, mainly?
Consultation might be done at the onset, but community-led development is not. And if you want to spot the difference, trust the communities, trust those who are going to be affected. Some of the areas we've mentioned here are areas that obviously have been suffering from blight, and there's basically nothing there, as you say. But these are areas where people live, where people work, and that they don't want to go and they don't need to go.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no reason why they have to go. There's no reason, as David is saying, why development shouldn't integrate those who are living there with the new.
But we can go further than that, because the Latin Villages campaign's been going for 16 years, and we are offering, I think it's the 3rd iteration of our community plan.
Yes.
So this is a plan that links into community wealth buildings, that is led by the local community, where profits will stay within the area and they're not taken out to some multinational corporation.
Yeah.
This is how we can keep community thriving, and this would benefit the whole of Tottenham.
But you when this started,
Yeah.
had not even started junior school, without giving away your age.
But I'm a person of
What I'm
colour,
saying is
so...
for 16 years,
Yeah, no, exactly,
you have
yeah.
been standing in the way of progress in some people's
I wouldn't
eyes.
say it's standing in the way of progress, but these are people of colour that are having to fight at the forefront of these changes because it affects us the most. If the Latin Village goes, you're literally ripping away the cultural rights of so many Latin Americans. We have Ugandans in there, we have Romanians. By institutions siding with soulless developers in this situation, you are saying people of colour don't matter. They don't deserve the right to their culture.
So you want to remain isolated, if you like?
It's not about isolated, actually. In this campaign as well, you can see that so many communities have come together, be it white, black, brown, like myself. So many people have come together, united in the cause, and we're literally saying to our councils, this is what we want. We have viable solutions, and they're ignoring us.
OK, you've got the United... Can I just ask this one, because I want to get this one out there?
Yeah.
The United Nations has come riding to the rescue, well, perhaps.
So actually, I think the United Nations came to help us strengthen our argument, saying that the developer, Granger PLC, is threatening the cultural rights of Latin Americans with the potential displacement of our community. But the UN, they're not the people that are going to make concrete change here. It's Haringey Council. So we go even closer in. Haringey Council, TfL, they have the final
Transport
word.
for London.
Yeah, they have the final word on this. So they can choose whether they want to support people or capitalist profit.
Okay, but the UN is the headline grabber here, isn't it? And their representative said this is an issue with global implications.
Yes.
This was more than a year ago. Have you heard
Yeah.
anything from them?
No, because they're not the people that we need to focus
No, but
on
have
right
you heard?
now.
You've heard nothing from them.
No,
so it's
but we
all
will
hot
hear more.
air, effectively.
It's not hot air. They're literally just helping us strengthen our argument. And, you know, it's not the institutions right now that are protecting us or helping us. This is why we're taking it back into community action.
Well, let's ask King about this. I've written down here, were people consulted about the redevelopment, if you like, that's a pretty neutral word, of certain parts of Atlanta. And if you campaign against this sort of thing, where do you best look for your support? Do you go in, as Javie's saying, or do you go out to some big global international group?
So for Atlanta, people directly appealed to our housing authority, and they also went to our city council. And for the most part, a few of their concerns were addressed, but most of them kind of fell on deaf ears. And so a lot of the grassroots level organizing was about residents who wanted to make sure when new places came that they had a seat at the table, a literal seat at the table, and a literal place to live. And so it depended on housing projects. So a few of them had that when everyone got the same benefits, but most did not, because they didn't organize on a community level enough to really make those changes happen.
But you've caught the ear of the new mayor of Atlanta. Tell us a little bit about, you hope he's going to change some laws. Which ones?
Well, with the new Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, one of her biggest pushes is going to be affordable housing. And she is pledging $1 billion in funds to go towards developing affordable housing in the city of Atlanta. And they just broke ground this year. And her goal is to, in addition to that $1 billion, to also implement programs that keep people from being vulnerable to gentrification. So it's a very ambitious plan. And we'll be interested to see how it turns out. I've been very critical about certain things, but at least they're listening.
I drew up a list, not entirely of my own making, of the pros and the cons of gentrification. And a couple of the ones at the top of the list as pros were that it gave more jobs to people in the area because restaurants came in. It made the area safer. Anybody got any more to add to that? Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, I should say, rather than does.
There's no one size fits all, but certainly, you know, positives related to regeneration and gentrification can be environmental. There's often an environmental aspect to this, where you've got former industrial areas, commonplace in the UK, that need upbringing, and you also often get social unrest in certain areas. Crime statistics would show that there's often a reduction in crime post-regeneration works. So these are aspects that are at the forefront often of why local authorities will push forward large regeneration projects in areas.
Or is that what they say, that they make it sound altruistic, whereas in fact, actually, it brings money to them, into their coffers, taxes from new businesses that come in, rents of buildings which they own, they could go up as well?
That's fair. And also, of course, in the UK, we're under huge pressure to develop housing. And that often overrides local issues. You know, we need over million houses, 1.3 million social houses in the next 20 years, according to Shelter.
And there's a big programme down in Bath, which I read about an area not quite the same as yours, but it's a local campaign nonetheless. And they admit that Bath does need new homes. There are going to be extra homes put here, but they're complaining about the density of these homes. You can't have it all, can you? If you need new homes, you have to put them somewhere.
You can't have it all, but you need some clear criteria of what progress or improvement means. You know, even just talking about why has the UN been involved? It's because
they've got good PR people.
But
they've got people who are
because
thinking cleverly.
The Equalities Act identified characteristics, and one of these characteristics is culture. And cultural gentrification is a problem. When we talk about improvement of an area, we're talking about improvement of an area by displacing the crime, the poorest people outside to a different area. When we talk about mixing, or mentioning that an area wants to stay an exclusive area, but by removing that area, we're removing the overall diversity of London. The Latin Village, as much as Elephant and Castle, serves the Latin community across London. They don't just serve the Latin community in those areas. So London has a system, cities are systems. There is a diversity, an overall diversity that needs to be protected. If you look at the single area, it might as well improve, but overall London loses, and we all lose.
How long have you been in London, Elena?
17 years.
Okay, I'm going back to my formative years, if you like, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, in the 1970s, and I had friends who lived in Hackney. Now, their house was great, but you would not want to walk down Hackney. It was dangerous. You felt threatened. It isn't like that. Now, one of my daughters lives there. It's a lovely neighbourhood.
Where is the crime gone? It's gone somewhere else. It's not just
not necessarily.
What?
What I'm saying is that there can be improvements, and she's very happy living there, and so are so many others.
There's no need to displace existing community for those improvements to happen.
Okay.
There's no need.
These things have a very, very much like a racial element to it. For example, in 1981, after the Brixton riots, there was a paper published called It Took a Riot It was a Thatcherite report that basically wanted to accelerate gentrification schemes across London and the UK in direct response to seeing migrant and minority communities getting together and being so strong and uprising against the institutions.
Who told you that they were all just so strong? I mean, I was down there, I was covering this, and there were petrol bombs being thrown, there were buildings being burnt down, there were cars being set on fire. That was not necessarily...
But this is in response, you can look to Chile.
That was not necessarily a show of community solidarity. And you're talking about Michael Heseltine,
but I've not finished,
who was sent up to the north of England to help with places like Liverpool and Toxteth.
Yeah, exactly. But then after...
But they're much better places now, aren't they?
Let me finish. So in 2011, another report was made called It Took Another Riot, and this was in response to the Tottenham riots. And again, this was accelerating gentrification projects and so on. It's a deliberate attempt to displace communities. And yeah, there's violence, but we've got to look at why. Look at Chile at the moment with all the protests against Piñera's regime. People are uprising and people are angry, in particular working class, people of colour. These communities are angry because we're not being served by the institutions that are meant to be protecting us. So this is the reason why these kind of things happen. It's not because everyone's all happy and, you know, they want to pick up a fuss.
I'm well aware of that. I'm well aware of that. Yeah. King, I'm going to come to you and we'll throw this one out here for everybody. I mean, there has to be some sort of middle way here, doesn't there? Is there a solution? Just listen more?
Listening is a part of it, but one of the things we noticed in Atlanta that works really well, which is something most people don't want to do, which is this idea of one-for-one housing. So the idea that for every new housing that you build, if at least one house is built for somebody who is vulnerable, whether they be poor or elderly or disabled, that actually does help to kind of starve off some of the issues related to cultural and physical gentrification. Most people here don't want to do it because it costs more, but we know that works. And the other one is when we have community benefits agreements, when we have developments in certain spots of Atlanta, which is the idea of as development happens, a community has a certain level of buy-in, certain level of input on the type of development, and that has worked as well. But those are in small cases. Okay,
so why don't planners do that? Rob?
Well, we're heading that way. I mean, in London, we have the City of London Plan, which is working, interestingly, almost the same maths. It's got a 50% affordable housing target. Now, there has been a series of systematic...
No, this is 1 for 1. This is like 100% almost.
Yeah.
It's not 50%.
It's not 50%, but it's... And indeed, we're not reaching 50%. Systematically, it's been around the 20s. And indeed, the Mayor of London's declared that 35% is his target, which is based on a reality, really. As I say, we've never got near there since the 80s.
But why is it a reality? When people need homes, and they need affordable homes, and developers are making a great deal of money, why isn't it a reality that for every house you build for which you make £600,000 profit, you have to build another one that costs you $250,000 and give it to somebody who can afford it?
It's a reality because of the demand and supply situation we live in London. The house prices are so extreme that even for developers with whatever backing, they still find it difficult to find affordable sites. I think probably 2/3 of the sites we get approached to look at never get off the starting blocks, and people don't hear about those. They hear about the 1/3 that does come forwards, but 2/3 don't come forward because they are not viable economically.
Would that be an answer, do you think, Javie? I mean, not to your specific problem. We'll hopefully hear about that in the future, but to the idea of gentrifying particular areas. What did you call it? Social exclusion?
Social cleansing. Social
cleansing. If developers, if there was a law that made people have to build affordable housing, would that be an answer?
Not in my opinion, because we have communities that are presenting viable alternatives from the ground up. So if you look into community wealth buildings, this is a model that proposes working with local businesses within the areas and keeping the money generating, self-generating in these areas. So we don't have to go with corporations. This isn't the future that we have to have.
It's always been with us, though, hasn't it, Elena?
Well, it's interesting that David was mentioning that we haven't been able to do it since the 80s, which is when the Thatcher government introduced the right to buy, when the Thatcher government introduced a serious diminished capacity for local authorities to build housing. And local authorities are starting to build again now. The sterling price from the RIBA has gone to social housing development. The Guardian has an article out about local authorities building again. We need to diversify the way we produce housing. We need to diversify the way we build the cities and
So can I just ask you
including
this
community
one?
groups.
Okay, I had intimate knowledge of two new towns, if you like, Stevenage and Letchworth Garden City, where I started my newspaper career. People were moved out of London, effectively, to go to these places. Is that acceptable if you move them away from the areas they know, as long as there is housing? Is it then acceptable to gentrify the area which they have left? Because that's the happy medium, but it may not be a happy one.
I don't think that's necessary. I think there's no need to kind of move people because, again,
But I say, if people have homes, no matter where they are, is it okay to gentrify?
No, I don't think so. I think it diminishes the diversity of places and is always detrimental to the quality of life in the city.
Okay, so quick final word from you, King. There is no happy medium, is there?
As of now, no, but there could be in the future.
Well, that was wonderfully brief. Thank you very much indeed, Rob. Elena, thank you very much for watching this, I thought, fascinating edition of Roundtable. Gentrification, good or bad? Bit of both, I think, seems to be the answer. You've just got to sort of tread very carefully with whatever you do. Thank you for watching. From me, David Foster. Goodbye.